The pitch was perfect. A British-Indian tech founder, a platform that could build any software application in minutes, powered by artificial intelligence. Investors lined up. Microsoft signed on. The valuation climbed and climbed until it reached $1.5 billion. And someone finally looked behind the curtain. What they found was not a machine. It was a room. Hundreds of people sitting at computers doing by hand what the company had promised its AI was doing automatically. The product was real. The intelligence was not. The question is how a lie that size holds together long enough to become a unicorn. That answer begins with how completely everyone wanted to believe it. By 2023, Builder.ai was not a startup anyone dismissed. It had raised over $450 million across multiple funding rounds. It counted Microsoft as a strategic partner. Its founder, Sachin Dev Duggal, was a fixture on the global tech conference circuit. Interviewed, profiled, celebrated. The company's core promise was arresting in its simplicity. Building software, the kind that normally takes months and costs hundreds of thousands of dollars, could now be done in days through an AI-driven platform called Natasha. You described what you wanted. Natasha assembled it. The pitch resonated with exactly the anxiety the market was feeling, that software development was too slow, too expensive, too dependent on scarce engineering talent. Builder.ai positioned itself as the solution. The numbers the company presented were compelling. It claimed tens of thousands of customers. It claimed annualized revenue that justified, at least on paper, the valuations it was commanding. The brand was carefully constructed, not a scrappy outsourcing shop, but a frontier AI company, the kind that belonged in the same conversation as the giants reshaping the industry. Duggal himself was an effective communicator of that vision. He spoke fluently about machine learning, about automation, about the future of software creation. Investors heard what they wanted to hear. A large and credible partner in Microsoft lent the enterprise a legitimacy that opened further doors. The funding rounds reflected that confidence. The company raised capital from investors including the Qatar Investment Authority and Jungle Ventures, among others. Each round came with fresh valuations, fresh headlines, fresh momentum. By the time Builder.ai crossed the unicorn threshold, the informal but totemic $1 billion valuation mark, it was treated as confirmation of a thesis, not a question to be interrogated. The AI revolution was real. Builder.ai was proof. But somewhere inside the architecture of that proof, there was a weight-bearing wall that did not appear on any blueprint. The platform worked. Customers received software. Deadlines were met. The product was not a fiction. What was a fiction was the mechanism producing it, and that fiction had been carefully maintained, audited around, and presented to the world as innovation. The question no one thought to ask loudly enough was a simple one. If the AI is doing the work, why does the company need so many people? The first formal signal came not from a regulator or a whistleblower, but from an auditor's desk. In late 2023, Grant Thornton, the company's auditor, declined to sign off on Builder.ai's financial statements. According to reporting by the Financial Times and subsequent court filings, the auditors had identified significant concerns about the revenue figures the company was presenting. Specifically, whether the revenues being booked were genuine and whether the customer contracts underlying them were what they appeared to be. This is the moment that separates a company under pressure from a company in crisis. A qualified audit or a refusal to complete one is not a procedural inconvenience. It is a structural alarm. Lenders and investors who have extended capital on the basis of audited accounts suddenly find themselves holding exposure they cannot properly price. For Builder.ai, the consequences were rapid. The company began struggling to access credit facilities it had previously relied upon. Cash flow, already under strain, tightened further. And then, the specific nature of the problem became clearer. According to findings cited in court proceedings and covered extensively by the Financial Times, The revenue figures Builder.ai had been reporting included contracts that investigators later concluded were fictitious. The scale of the alleged fabrication was not marginal. It was, according to those proceedings, systemic. A pattern of inflated or invented customer contracts that had been used to support the company's financial picture across multiple periods. Here is what no one had fully calculated. The back-office operation that actually delivered Builder.ai's product was enormous. Hundreds of workers, based primarily in India, were doing manually what the platform's marketing described as automated. They were the AI. They received customer specifications, broke them into components, assembled software from templates and pre-built modules, and delivered the result through an interface that looked, to the customer, like the output of a machine. This model, sometimes called pseudo-AI or AI washing in subsequent commentary, was not unique to Builder.ai. But the scale at which it was deployed here and the valuations it was used to support were extraordinary. The structural problem was not just ethical, it was financial. Running hundreds of human workers is expensive. The unit economics of a genuine AI platform, where marginal cost approaches zero as the system scales, are radically different from the unit economics of a labor-intensive service business dressed in AI branding. Builder.ai's cost base reflected the reality. Its revenue figures, according to investigators, reflected something else entirely. The gap between those two numbers was the hole at the center of the company. By early 2024, the situation had become uncontainable. Staff were reporting delayed salary payments. Vendors were not being paid. The internal communications that later surfaced in proceedings described a company in acute financial distress, scrambling to manage obligations it could no longer meet. The auditors had seen it first. The employees were living it now. The investors were about to. In January 2024, Builder.ai entered administration in the United Kingdom. The firm Teneo was appointed as administrator. What followed was the forensic dismantling of a company that had weeks earlier been described in investor materials as a global AI leader. The administration proceedings began to surface the detail that the audit process had flagged, and the picture that emerged was significantly worse than even the most pessimistic external assessment had suggested. According to documents filed in the administration proceedings and reported by the Financial Times and other outlets, investigators identified a substantial body of revenue that appeared to have been fabricated. Customer contracts that had been used to support the company's financial statements were found, upon examination, to lack the substance that had been claimed for them. The revenue they represented had not been earned in the way it had been presented. The implications for the company's historical valuations, and for the investors who had relied on those valuations, were severe. The total capital raised by Builder.ai across its history was reported at over $450 million. The gap between what investors believed they were funding and what they were actually funding was, by any measure, vast. For the Qatar Investment Authority, for Jungle Ventures, for the other institutional backers who had participated in later rounds, the administration represented losses that could not be recovered through any restructuring. The asset base simply did not support the liabilities. Sachin Dev Duggal, the founder, had departed the company prior to the administration. According to reporting by the Financial Times and statements made in legal proceedings, he relocated and was not immediately available to administrators seeking information about the company's finances. The Serious Fraud Office in the United Kingdom opened an investigation. In India, the Enforcement Directorate, the Financial Crimes Agency, launched its own parallel inquiry. The cross-jurisdictional nature of the company's operations, with development staff in India, corporate structure in the United Kingdom, and investors across multiple geographies, meant the investigative threads were numerous and slow to converge. For the employees, the collapse was immediate and personal. Hundreds of workers, the people who had, in effect, been the product, found themselves without wages owed to them and without the legal protections that workers in more formally structured companies might have expected. In India, where the bulk of the operational workforce was based, reports emerged of staff who had not been paid for months before the administration was announced. The human cost of the collapse was distributed across a workforce that had little visibility into the financial architecture above them. The Microsoft partnership, which had lent the company so much of its credibility, quietly receded. The conference appearances, the investor decks, the profile pieces, the entire apparatus of legitimacy that had sustained the valuation dissolved with the speed that such things always do once the underlying structure gives way. What remained was the administration estate, the investigative files, and the question of accountability. As of the time of this production, the Serious Fraud Office investigation into Builder.ai remains open. No criminal charges have been filed in the United Kingdom. The Enforcement Directorate inquiry in India is ongoing. Sachin Dev Duggal has not been convicted of any offense. These are the facts the record supports, and they are stated here exactly as the record supports them, no more. What the administration proceedings have established, without ambiguity, is the financial picture. The company's reported revenues were found to include fabricated contracts. The AI platform that justified a $1.5 billion valuation was, in its operational reality, a large and expensive human workforce. The gap between the story and the substance was not a rounding error or an accounting judgment call. It was, according to the findings of the administrators and the concerns raised by the auditors, structural and sustained. For the investors, the recovery prospects are limited. Administration estates in cases of this kind rarely return meaningful value to equity holders. The secured creditors take priority. The unsecured creditors, which in this case include employees owed back wages, sit further down the queue. The Qatar Investment Authority and the other institutional investors who participated in the later, higher valuation rounds are unlikely to see significant recovery. That is the arithmetic of a collapsed unicorn. The Builder.ai case sits within a broader pattern that the technology investment cycle of the early 2020s produced with some regularity. Companies in which the distance between the marketed capability and the operational reality was large, and in which that distance was sustained by the willingness of well-resourced investors to accept the story without sufficient scrutiny of the substance. The due diligence that might have caught the discrepancy earlier was available. The audit process, when it was finally applied rigorously, found the problem within a single cycle. The information was not hidden beyond the reach of a determined examination. It was hidden behind the momentum of a bull market in AI narratives. The lesson the record offers is a narrow one, stated plainly. A credible partner on the cap table is not a substitute for audited revenue. Microsoft's name on the partnership announcement told investors something real, that the product had utility, that the technology direction was credible. It told them nothing about whether the revenue figures were genuine. Those are different questions, and in the Builder.ai case, only one of them was being asked consistently. The other was deferred, round after round, until the auditors finally refused to defer it any longer. By then, the money was gone.